Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and today we have a repeat guest for us is Dr. Eric Bailey. He's the Beef Nutritionist Specialist for University of Missouri in the Division of Animal Sciences. And Eric, we were talking about this a year ago about the drought and how we could prepare for feeding that winter, and I think we're worse off now than we were a year ago.
Good morning, Tim. Thanks for having me here with you all this morning. I completely agree with you, unfortunately. It's, we were dry last fall, and we started feeding hay early, and then, farmers made a third of the hay crop they normally do now in 2023, and we're sitting here asking questions about how we're going to get to the next growing season, basically, and feed cows this winter, despite strong prices for calves and cows and for everything, quite honestly.
But the strong price is also, we also have high cost.
Unfortunately, at least from what I'm seeing, input costs are rising just as rapidly, so we're not any more profitable. The thing that I kind of struggle with from that perspective is that essentially now we're spending more money to make a similar dollar figure in profit, but on a return on investment perspective, if I'm risking $1,000 to make $100, that's a 10% return on investment. If I'm risking $2,000 to make $100, that's a 5% return on investment.
And we may not even have that return on investment at all.
Exactly.
We maybe just be trying to maintain and not lose as much.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest concerns right now is, I've been balancing rations for farmers across the state and trying to help them think through options of, hey, the fescue hay is not there. What other feed options can we use? Or maybe they want to continue to feed hay and then to just go out on the market and purchase that hay. And, I've just seen, just feed cost-wise, I've seen rations will cost over $5 a cow a day.
And that's for maintenance, not gain.
That's for maintenance, not gain. That's for a mature beef cow. I would have never thought we would have been in that position, but
wow.
Interestingly enough, at least right now, if you look on the Missouri hay market summary, on the weekly market summary that the MDA puts out, they're advertising mixed grass hay round bales for anywhere from $50 to $100 a bale. So there may be some deals out there to be had still, but I also see on Facebook and Craigslist and other places pretty regularly people that are off asking $70 for a bale of corn stalks, $50, $60 for a bale of wheat straw. We're talking 40 TDN, 40, maybe 44, 45 TDN feedstuffs for fescue hay is 50 to 55. So if we're paying now for a feed that's got 20% less energy, what we would have paid for normal hay last year or in previous years, then we're going to have to backfill those rations with additional calories because, the number one issue that we have when we run into periods of drought like this in terms of feeding a beef cow is that we're short on calories. It's not protein, it's not minerals and vitamins, although it can be. But really the predominant problem is that, especially with these really high fiber feedstuffs, a cow cannot eat enough to get the requisite pounds of TDN to meet her maintenance energy requirements. So then we buy these undervalued, cheap forages, and we still going to have to come back and feed them several pounds of a commodity mix of some kind of grain supplement just to get the energy up in the diet so that the cow can maintain. And that's how we end up in that situation where we spend maybe not $5 a cow a day in hay, but we might spend $3 a cow a day in hay, but then need to come back with $2 in grain supplements.
So is there a minimum TDN that we like to look for that could meet their requirements? That's
a great question, Tim. So we can talk about TDN in two ways. So the first way is we can talk about it in terms of percent. So when you go to an analytical lab and you get a feed analysis done, they'll give you a TDN value in percent. If you're working in percent, the assumption you're making is that the cow has unrestricted access to feed, that her ration, if it's X TDN percent, will meet her energy requirements. In general, a beef cow is going to need a diet that's somewhere between low 50s, let's say 52 TDN, and 62 TDN. Now, the 52 TDN cow is a pregnant, non-lactating, kind of a second period of gestation. Calf's been weaned off. The spring calving cow right now, if you will, or
Sure.
or over the past 60 days, where the 62 TDN diet is a beef cow that's calved in the past 60 days and is, at her peak lactation. So fall calving cows that are fixing to get bred right now, that would be a cow that needs a 62 TDN diet.
All right.
The other way of looking at TDN is on a pounds per day basis. In general, a beef cow needs about 9 to 16 pounds of TDN per day. And, I didn't define this at first use, so, shame on me, but TDN stands for total digestible nutrients. It's a measurement of energy in a feedstuff. And we don't have a great way to measure energy directly in a feedstuff that would relate back to how a beef cow would utilize it. It's difficult to do in a lab, so we analyze for the fiber content of a forage, and then we over time have figured out that essentially the more fiber that's in, and I'm talking cellulose and lignin, the more fiber or cellulose and lignin that's in a feedstuff, the lower the energy value is, the lower the digestibility is. So there's an inverse relationship between fiber and TDN. It is not a perfect system, but I have had really good luck talking to farmers about TDN. TDN seems to make more sense. It's an easier concept for them to grasp than to get into talking about calories and megacalories.
Sure.
And, then in the beef cattle world, we have, net energy for maintenance, net energy for gain, net energy for lactation. It gets complex.
Oh, yes.
And when I'm trying to communicate the message to an extension audience, I back up and I know that there's shortcomings to TDN, but I also know that I'm more likely to carry that message across and to get folks in the ballpark when I talk about TDN.
Corn stalks, you say, are in the 40 range.
Yeah, 40, 45. Good corn stalks will be in the mid 40s.
So those are going to have to be supplemented with something.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no way that if you buy corn stalk bales and put them out for a beef cow that she's going to meet her maintenance requirements unless, and this is a big but. So there's really three components of a corn stalk bale, right? So there's leaf, husk, and stem. There might be some cob in there too. There's really probably four. Leaf and husk have greater TDN values than cob and stalk. You could hypothetically allow a beef cow to pick all of the leaf and the husk out of the stalk bale and get a little higher TDN, but then you're probably going to waste 40 to 60% of the bale if you let them be that selective. And so then if you paid $70 for that bale and you waste half of it, you essentially then paid double the amount for that feed, right? So then at that point, you're paying $140 a bale.
Probably for 48 TDN.
Yeah, you're right, Tim, exactly, for 48 TDN, not for 62 TDN, not 55 TDN. You're absolutely right.
Now, if you or your neighbor has some cornfields that didn't bale but are out there, there's a rule of thumb that you once told me about how many cow days per acre per 100 bushels of corn.
Yeah, so if you divide the bushels per corn by 3.5, that'll give you the number of cow days per acre. So I'll say that again. So let's do the number of bushels of grain.
So let's say 120 bushels.
So 120 bushels divided by 3.5, that will tell you how many days you can have one cow out on an acre. And I know that math it's not quite clean because 120 divided by 3.5 is not 40, it's 37.5, whatever it is, right? So
140 bushel of corn would be 4.
Yep, exactly. There we go. There's a nice, easy divisible.
So 140 bushel corn, which I heard some farmers, that's about average for this year.
Yeah.
You get 4 cow days per acre.
40 cow days.
40 cow days per acre.
40 cow days, yeah, because you divide the 140 by 3.5.
3.5, okay.
So you could run 40 cows on an acre for one day, or you could run one cow for 40 days on an acre.
And she's still, though, picking mainly the leaves and the husk.
Yeah, so
a little bit of grain, but...
Yeah, but, modern combines leave, 2-3% grain in the field. It's not the old school, leave...
We get fat hogs on them.
Exactly, right? So it's not that, grazing corn stalks, that's something that we got to do more of in this state because that's especially north of I-70. That's a feed resource that we're leaving out in the field. We're shredding the stalks. We're disking them back under. There's a lot of people that are baling them right now, and because there's money in it. But I think going forward, it's probably more sustainable in the long term to invest in some temporary fence and a way to get water to those cows, because that's the biggest
water.
That's the biggest complaint right now, and the thing that corn farmers in Nebraska have figured out, and in other states, right? So corn stalk grazing is more common in other states, and probably Nebraska's the leader in research in that area and promotion of it, in farmers actually implementing that practice. It's figuring out the fence and water infrastructure.
Yeah, and they can walk half a mile for water. Is that stretching it?
We generally say that it's about, at least in kind of this tame grass pasture part of the country, it's about 1,000 feet before
less than a quarter mile.
Yeah, before the utilization begins to drop off. Now, where I come from, a paddock or a trap for us is over a section. So
in New Mexico.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm from New Mexico originally, and it's taken me a long time to adapt to she can walk a mile, no problem, right? But the reality is the data that would have come out of the University of Missouri and other places in the fescue belt, they would say that you get over a quarter of a mile and you're definitely going to see less utilization.
So we need ponds or some sort of water source. Yeah. Now, this long fall that we've had allowed for a lot of wheat planted. I've probably seen more wheat planted than I've seen in a long time. I think the price of wheat's up a little bit, and of course cover crops. Now, those could be utilized, but they're going to have some size to them first, aren't they?
Yeah, so the theory behind double cropping wheat, right, is that it makes more tillers than what it could possibly use for grain, right? So you can go in there and graze some of it off.
Right.
But still not negatively impact grain yield in the subsequent year. But, if you planted it late and it's 3 inches tall and you're going to expect to go out there and graze it and still make a crop, that's probably not going to happen, right? So, it definitely needs to have some size to it, and it needs to be grazed lightly if your intention is to, in fact, still try to harvest a grain crop off of it in the spring. So
yes, that's something we should have taken care of early in August, but we didn't have the rains to even get the crop up.
Yeah, and that's
cover crop or something into the stalk.
That's the hard part right now, is that there's some folks that are trying to, seeing these 70-degree days in late November and thinking, they're going to last long enough that we can get a cover crop in the ground right now and we'll get it to germinate and we'll be good to go. And maybe not for fall grazing, maybe even just for spring grazing, but how is this plant going to develop any root? Because our day length is getting real short. Yes. These warm temps are well outside of normal ranges, and quite honestly, it's probably going to cool off in the next week or two, right? So, is that crop going to winter? Is it going to have the root reserves to winter? Or is it going to winter kill, right? Especially if it's planted this late.
You're setting it up to die. So really, you're thinking maybe March, April before we ever utilize that at all.
Absolutely.
Sure. We overseeded some cover crops, some kales and those for some high protein, and did that in August, but there was no rainfall.
Yeah.
And we don't have anything still. So you can come to some roadblocks there. So it doesn't look any better in the future, in the near term, does it, on the weather? And
no, and that's my biggest concern, is that, so when I think about rainfall, I don't think about it from a January to December perspective. I think about rainfall from November 1 to October 31st, because it coincides better with our growing seasons. So a water year, if you will. We're ending a water year right now. We just ended a water year, and data from the Southern Regional Climate Center would show that much of the state has ended the year more than 10 inches in deficit from a precipitation standpoint. So we have overdrawn our checkbook, and now we're going into the next growing season with a deficit. So, it's going to be very important for 2024 forage production that we have a wet winter and that we correct in some places a 10 to 15 inch precipitation deficit. Because if we don't, that's a deficit that we will have to overcome before we get normal spring growth. Right now, I will caution, we did something similar last year. We were dry. We got some wet weather over the winter months. A lot of the data would show that a lot of the soil moisture deficits were overcome in the winter, right? You have very little evapotranspiration. If you get, before the ground's froze, you get a good grass shower that comes in gently and slowly and soaks in. We can make up soil moisture pretty quickly because evapotranspiration rate's so low. But if we don't keep an eye on the weather, if we don't keep an eye on precipitation, if we're dry all winter long, right? Remember, November, December, and January, the 3 driest months of the year in the state of Missouri, we're going to have a big deficit going into 24. And I predict, not willingly, but pragmatically, that we're probably going to see some impacts on our forage crops, our pasture forage crops next year.
Well, last year, we made up for it in the winter, or partially, but then our spring was so dry, a lot of forages didn't even respond to the fertilizer.
Yeah, and that's the concern that we have right now too, because so we have willingly overgrazed pastures. Yep. Not just once, not just twice now. We've done it several times. And, it'll be curious to see, because I'm already getting reports from farmers that think that there's going to be damage to their fescue stands just because of they didn't have any place else for the cows to go. They hung on to cows. They fed them. They grazed the pastures to zero, which is, really a bad idea during the growing season, because when you overgraze a pasture down and essentially clip all the solar panels, the leaves of the grass, if you will, off, the plant has to use nutrient reserves from the roots. It has to essentially kill off a part of the root to put up a new solar panel so that it can start doing photosynthesis again and regenerating nutrients. Well, you do that over and over again, and you're going to eventually kill a plant, right?
Right. So it's going in the winter in a weakened state.
Yep.
So we may want to think about maybe overseeding some legumes this winter. Maybe some white clover or something.
Yeah. So frost seeding, that's a pretty common practice. That would be something that would be recommended. It's probably too late to overseed grass now at this point, but right. I'm also not an agronomist.
No. You've been fine.
But yeah, so frost seeding is going to be important.
January, February, where we can get some red clovers and white clovers, and to help supplement this. But last year, our red clover came up, and it was so dry in the spring, it died.
Yeah.
So we tried this fall to reestablish it. It was still too dry.
Yep.
So we've put the red clover out to seed twice now and not gotten a stand.
Absolutely.
So that's getting concerning too.
I think being vigilant, keeping an eye on moisture is, most farmers will write it on their calendar when they get something, right? Snow, precip.
Right.
I think we really got to keep an eye on it. And I think that at least in the short term, we have to ask a question if it's even time to restock yet or not, right? Because I would tell you that if you are running a normal stocking rate right now and you're concerned about winter hay feeding, having enough to feed the cows over the winter, we probably need to either go out on the market and buy more hay now before the price gets up, or consider kind of strategically culling off some females that maybe they're, the open ones are the obvious ones. The ones that are, fence chasers are obvious, but I question whether or not we ought to be considering selling some of those late calving cows, right? So the bred cow market is still strong locally. It's maybe not as strong in other parts of the state, but you look at the central, east central, northeast region of Missouri, and bred cows are selling for quite a bit of money. And my thought process behind that is that if you have a long calving season, I'll define a long calving season as a 90-day calving season. Let's take a cow that's calving on day 1 and a cow that calves on day 90, which are extreme examples, but not out of the realm of possibility. Okay? A cow that calves on day one, assuming that we're going to wean the calves off of the 2 cows, day 1 and day 90 cow, on the same day, that calf is going to weigh 200 pounds more, the one that was born on day 1 as the one that's born on day 90. And right now, if I'm going to spend $5 a cow a day to feed over the winter, I want to wean a 6-weight calf. I don't want to wean a 4-weight calf. 400 pound. Yeah. I want to wean a 600-pound calf, not a 400-pound calf, right? Because at least at $250 a pound, that's $500 in revenue difference right there between the early and the late calving cow. Yet my expenses are the same, right? Because I'm not going to separate them and feed them differently. So there's $500 in revenue difference between those 2 calves. If you've done a preg check and your veterinarian has identified cows that are shortbred, they're in the first trimester gestation, they're likely to calve late. If you know of cows that have calved late in previous years, maybe they're getting up there in age, they're just kind of slowly weeding themselves out of the herd. I think this is a great time to go in and strategically kind of reduce the number of mouths to feed, not just by culling open females or bad eyes, bad udders, something like that, but to maybe use this as an opportunity to tighten up your calving season as well and move some of those late calving females that might be worth more to somebody else than they are to you, because not everybody calves in the exact same window, right? So, from a spring calving cow perspective, it's funny we call it spring calving, but the reality is it's winter calving, So guys that calve in January and February, there are people out there that will calve in March and April in the state, and they may be on the market for females right now. At least the auction market data would suggest the same thing. I'll give you a suggestion for the fall calving herds too. This is a year that we have a tight breeding season. I mean, 1 round of AI and 30-day breeding season, and if they're not bred, send them to town, right? So, if you've already turned bulls out, don't leave the bulls out for 90 days, because those females that are going to get bred between day 60 and day 90 are probably worth less to you than they are to somebody else. Now, the argument there is that a cull cow will bring less than a bred cow, and I completely agree with that. So I'm not saying that the bull can't stay out there. I'm saying use artificial insemination to try and front load, get as many cows to calve in a short period of time as possible. And with AI, it's possible to get 2/3 of the cows, to breed at, essentially on the same day. Maybe you market those bred females, the late bred females, to somebody else, but you do not try to keep them on the payroll over the entire winter, because, hay is in short supply.
And so it just depends, like you said, how much hay you've got and what you can afford to go through. Did the herd get reduced much from this last year?
So nationwide, we are going to be down approximately 300,000 cows. We have the same number of cows now that we did in the early 1960s. So our U.S. beef cow inventory is the same as it was in the 60s, and beef production is slated to be down. Now, Scott Brown and all those guys have those numbers way more memorized than I do, but we've not seen any signs of rebuilding. And in fact, for the first time ever, over 40% of the cattle on feed in feedlots right now in the United States are heifers.
Wow.
We're placing a lot of heifers on feed still. So that's another sign that rather than keeping these females as replacements, they're going into the yard. They're going to the beef supply.
But you also got to remember, if you do reduce your breeding herd, you're going to have to replace it too.
And that's the challenge going forward, right? So, when guys like me, armchair desk jockeys, make claims like this, we make the claims in a vacuum, right? And I don't think a lot of us think about the real life ramifications, right? So there's tax implications. There are the thought of selling low at a low price to only have to go back and buy higher later on, right? Now, the market would suggest that prices are high right now. We haven't seen the dip that we saw during previous droughts. So, you might still be able to get good money for the animals, but are they going to appreciate and value more in the future? That's a fair question. But at the same time, that's also not a reason to willingly open your checkbook out and light your money on fire trying to feed your way through it. So it's a difficult
save
decision.
your feed money to replace for some different genetics, for example.
Yeah, or even offset some of your tax bill by reinvesting in fence and water infrastructure, right? So you can double the carrying capacity of your farm with a well-planned rotational grazing system if you don't have one in place right now. But that requires water, that requires fence. And I say water first because that's what people don't think about enough. They think about polywire and, solar chargers and all of that to be the key to a rotational grazing system. It's not. It's water.
And even excess of water in some of your crop ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you could utilize fall corn grazing or winter wheat grazing. All right. Well, thanks so much, Eric. This has been a great discussion that is so important to cattle producers across Missouri and beyond.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, this is it for Tim's Take, and stay tuned for our next one.